Hello, everybody, and once again, this is Justin Pontarelli, and as promised, I'll be doing part 2 of Isaac Asimov's Nightfall, a reading by me, your narrator. Okay. I'm very nearsighted, so I gotta ditch these. I don't need to have glasses on while I'm reading a book. Some of you, I think, are probably blessed with farsightedness, so you don't have to have glasses on while driving. I have the exact opposite going on. I'm very nearsighted, so if I have glasses on while I try to read something, my eyes just kind of go bonkers. Anyway, let's see. Oh, yeah. So just like before, guys, that might pop up a few times. I admit I'm not a good husband. I have a wife. She lives in the Philippines. I live in New York. It's a long story. I've given out bits and pieces of it before. I'll probably never give it all in one video, so I just don't feel like being chatty right now. I just want to have some fun. Finish my project that I was doing today, doing the reading, doing the video. That's about it. Maybe I'll go to, I don't know. I'm an introvert, and to have a long, drawn-out conversation, I'm just not feeling it right now. Anyway, so if that happens, if Skype pops up, I'm just going to try to minimize it and move on. Don't guilt me into it. I'll try to maybe I'll get back to her, guys. Okay. I know I should get back to her. At least try to say hi and ask her what's going on. It's very difficult. Suffice to say, it's been a long, drawn-out thing. And my epilepsy getting bad and losing my job messed the entire plan up. The plan was either to bring her here or for me to go there. I'm hoping once I get my disability from the government, I can just go there, because from what I've been told, getting her brought here would be basically borderline impossible, because the U.S. government would probably chalk it up as a scam marriage. And if that's the case, if they believe that's the case, then they're not gonna let her in. Not from the Philippines, okay? So I guess there's like different laws governing different countries and immigration and all that stuff, so it's a mess. Anyway, enough depressing stuff. Yeah, so anyway, remember, give me some tips and pointers and ideas on how to dispatch Don Carnage's character so I can officially end the Interstellar pilot miniseries, A Pirate's Life, okay? But as far as I'm concerned, that means getting rid of Don Carnage by, Yeah, so that's, I know, it's sad, but the man's had a good run. But now he's got to go, because if he stays alive, there could always be like a part 2 and a whole other miniseries. And that's, if you guys want that week, I guess I could do that. If so, let me know in the comments. If not, tell me how to kill him off, because, and I want to do it kind of kid-friendly, but not, hey, I just assume a more mature audience is watching me be crazy and stuff, so. Anyway, okay. Without any further ado, part 2 of the reading of Isaac Asimov's Nightfall. So if you're a sci-fi fan, I hope you like the reading. I hope I do a good job of it. And if I do this, please ignore me, because I got a little nose itchy. Remember, one hand's on the book, one hand's on the phone, so you're going to see a lot of motion like this. It's not intentional. What I'm going to try to do is keep the phone on my face, and I'll be reading like this or like that, depending on what side of the which hand I'm using for the book. Let's put it that way. So let me find our page, and we'll get to it. Very fitting, because now it is actually Nightfall where I am as I read the book Nightfall, or as I read the story Nightfall. Okay. So yeah, so here we are. I'm just gonna kind of do a little overlap, not a lot, and I probably will not be able to maintain the character voices I was trying to do. And like I said, guys, it's kind of really silly when you get to watch a movie and every character has their own voice, their own attitude, their own everything. When you narrate your own book, or when you narrate a story and you're the only one doing it, they all have the same voice. It's like, ugh. Anyway, Isaac Asimov's Nightfall, or reading, part 2. Sharon spoke, and it was with an effort that he made it sound matter of fact. I think I heard Yamat's voice. He and Pharaoh are probably back. Let's go in and see what kept them. Might as well, muttered Thurman. He drew a long breath and seemed to shake himself. The tension was broken. The room was in an uproar, with members of the staff clustering about 2 young men who were removing outer garments, even as they parried the miscellany of questions. Okay, I'm going to pause real quick. I'm not familiar with that word. I assume it means many and varied. Kind of like miscellaneous, but it's spelled miscellany. So, yeah. You get these older books, and they use older and more advanced vocabulary. I think as each generation kind of, comes into the world, language gets dumbed down, sadly. And yeah, so. As they parried the plethora, I'll just change the word, plethora of questions being thrown at them, Aton bustled through the crowd and faced the newcomers angrily. Do you realize that it's less than half an hour before deadline? Where have you 2 been? Pharaoh 24 seated himself and rubbed his hands. His cheeks were red with the outdoor chill. Yamat and I have just finished carrying through a little crazy experiment of our own. We've been trying to see if we couldn't construct an arrangement by which we could simulate the appearance of darkness and stars so as to get an advanced notion as to how it looked. There was a confused murmur from the listeners, and a sudden look of interest entered Anton's eyes. There wasn't anything said of this before. How did you go about it? Well, said Pharaoh, the idea came to Yamat and myself long ago, and we've been working it out in our spare time. Yamat knew of a low 1-story house down in the city with a domed roof. It had once been used as a museum. I think, anyway, we bought it. Where did you get the money? Interrupted Anton peremptorily. Our bank accounts, grunted Yamat 70. It cost 2,000 credits. Then, defensively, well, what of it? Tomorrow, 2,000 credits will be 2,000 pieces of paper. That's all. Sure, agreed Pharaoh. We bought the place and rigged it up with black velvet from top to bottom so as to get as perfect a darkness as possible. Then we punched tiny holes in the ceiling and through the roof and covered them with little metal caps, all of which could be shoved aside simultaneously at the close of a switch. At least we didn't do that part ourselves. We got a carpenter, and an electrician, and some others. Money didn't count. The point was that we could get the light to shine through those holes in the roof so that we could so that we could get a star-like effect. Now, I gotta pause real quick. If they've never seen stars before, what do they know they even look like? I think Mr. Asimov kind of made a little goof there, didn't he? Just my opinion. Not a breath was drawn during the pause that followed. Anton said stiffly, "You have no right to make a private..." Pharaoh seemed abashed. I know, sir, but frankly, Yama and I thought the experiment was a little dangerous. If the effect really worked, we half expected to go mad. From what Sharon says about all this, we thought that would... We thought that would be rather likely. We wanted to take the risk ourselves. Of course, if we found we could retain sanity, it occurred to us that we might develop immunity to the real thing, and then expose the rest of you to the same thing. But things didn't work out at all. Why? What happened? It was Yamat who answered. We shut ourselves in and allowed our eyes to get accustomed to the dark. It's an extremely creepy feeling because the total darkness makes you feel as if the walls and ceiling are crushing in on you. Remember that from before? But we got over that and pulled the switch. The caps fell away and the roof glittered all over with little dots of light. Well, nothing. That was the wacky part of it. As I turn the page. Sorry for the shakiness of the camera, but that's what you get. Like I said last time, what you see in here is what you get. And more specifically, what you see in here is what I did. And I don't do editing. Nothing happened. It was just a roof with holes in it, and that's just what it looked like. We tried it over and over again. That's what kept us so late. But there just isn't any effect at all. There followed a shocked silence, and all eyes turned to Sharon, who sat motionless, mouth open. Thermon was the first to speak. That's the, if you remember from last time, guys, Theramon is the newspaper guy. He's the, I forget what they call him. Anyway, going on. You know what this does to the whole theory you've built up. Sharon, don't you? He was grinning with relief, but Sharon raised his hand. Now wait a while. Just let me think this through. And then he snapped his fingers, and when he lifted his head, there was neither surprise nor uncertainty in his eyes. Of course! He never finished. From somewhere up above, there sounded a sharp clang, and Benet, starting to his feet, dashed up the stairs with, "What the devil?" The rest followed after. Things happened quickly. Once up in the dome, Benet cast one horrified glance at the shattered photographic plates and at the man bending over them, and then hurled himself fiercely at the intruder, getting a death grip on his throat. There was a wild threshing, and as others of the staff joined in, the stranger was swallowed up and smothered under the weight of half a dozen angry men. Anton came up last, breathing heavily. Let him up. There was a reluctant unscrambling, and the stranger, panting harshly, with his clothes torn and his forehead bruised, was hauled to his feet. He had a short, yellow beard, curled elaborately in the style affected by the cultists. Dun, dun, dun. Benet shifted his hold to a collar grip and shook the man savagely. All right, rat. What's the idea? These plates. I wasn't after them, retorted the cultist coldly. That was an accident. Benet, sorry, had a burp. Benet followed, his glowering state and snarled. I see. You were after the cameras themselves. The accident with the plates was a stroke of luck for you, then. If you had touched Snapping Bertha or any of the others, you would have died by slow torture, as it is. He drew his fist back. Anton grabbed his sleeve. Stop that. Let him go. As I itch there and turn the page. I think I'll keep the way I have it right now. It seems to work. Sorry. Just close your eyes, guys. It's okay. Right hand on the book. Left hand on the phone. Okay, now the camera can stabilize. You can open your eyes again if you like. Sorry. The young technician wavered, and his arm dropped reluctantly. Anton pushed him aside and confronted the cultist. You're Latimer, aren't you? The cultist bowed stiffly and indicated the symbol upon his hip. I am Latimer 25, adjutant of the 3rd class to his seniority, SOAR 5. And Anton's white eyebrows lifted. You were with His Serenity when he visited me last week, weren't you? Latimer bowed a second time. Now then, what do you want? Nothing that you would give me of your own free will. SOAR 5 sent you, I suppose? Or is this your own idea? I'm going to pause right there for a quick moment, guys, just to explain. If you're new to the channel, I'm working on an old Samsung JV3 or J3V or something phone. And the camera function, this is like the camera app you're seeing, has a tendency to minimize itself automatically unless you're actively using it. And I'm only using it just to see my face on the screen in conjunction with the screen recorder app. So basically, if you don't use it, it minimizes. And I don't know how to stop that, so my apologies, guys. Okay. Moving on. Now then, what do you want? Nothing that you would give me of your own free will. SOAR 5 sent you, I suppose? Or is this your own idea? I won't answer that question. Will there be any further visitors? I won't answer that either. Anton glanced at his timepiece and scowled. Now, man, what is it your master wants of me? I have fulfilled my end of the bargain. Ooh, the plot thickens. Latimer smiled faintly, but said nothing. I asked him, continued Anton angrily, for data only the cult could supply, and it was given to me. For that, thank you. In return, I promise to prove the essential truth of the creed of the cult. There was no need to prove that, came the proud retort. It stands proven by the Book of Revelations. For the handful that constitute the cult, yes. Don't pretend to mistake my meaning. I offer to present scientific backing for your beliefs, and I did. The cultist's eyes narrowed bitterly. Yes, you did, with a fox's subtlety. For your pretended explanation backed our beliefs, and at the same time removed all necessity for them. You made of the darkness and of the stars a natural phenomena, and removed all its real significance. That was blasphemy. If so, the fault isn't mine. The facts exist. What can I do but state them? Your facts are a fraud and a delusion. Anton stamped angrily. How do you know? And the answer came with the certainty of absolute faith. I know. The director, purpled, and Benet whispered urgently. Anton waved him silent. And what does SOAR 5? Sorry. Turn the page. And what does SOAR 5 want us to do? He still thinks, I suppose, that in trying to warn the world, to take measures against the menace of madness, we are placing innumerable souls in jeopardy. We aren't succeeding, if that means anything to him. The attempt itself has done harm enough. And your vicious efforts to gain information by means of your devilish instruments must be stopped. We obey the will of their stars, and I only regret that my clumsiness prevented me from wrecking your infernal devices. It wouldn't have done you too much good, returned Anton. All our data, except for the direct evidence we intend collecting right now, is already safely cached, and well beyond possibility of harm. He smiled grimly. But that does not affect your present status as an attempted burglar and criminal. He turned to the man behind him. Someone call the police at Sorrow City. There was a cry of distaste from Sharon. Damn it, Anton, what's wrong with you? There's no time for that. Here. He bustled his way forward. Let me handle this. Anton stared down his nose at the psychologist. This is not the time for your monkey shines, Sharon. Will you please let me handle this my own way? Right now you are a complete outsider here, and don't forget it. Sharon's mouth twisted eloquently. Eloquently. I know that one. Now why should we go to the impossible trouble of calling the police with Beta's eclipse a matter of minutes from now, when this young man here is perfectly willing to pledge his word of honor to remain and cause no trouble whatsoever? The cultist answered promptly. I will do no such thing. You are free to do what you want, but it's only fair to warn you that just as soon as I get my chance, I'm going to finish what I came out here to do. If it's my word of honor you're relying on, you'd better call the police. Sharon smiled in a friendly fashion. You're a determined cuss, aren't you? Well, I'll explain something. Do you see that young man at the window? He's a strong, husky fellow, quite handy with his fists, and he's an outsider beside. Once the eclipse starts, there'll be nothing for him to do except keep a keen eye on you. Beside him, there will be myself, a little too stout for active fisticuffs, but still able to help. Well, what of it? Demanded Latimer frozenly. Listen and I'll tell you, was the reply. Just as soon as the eclipse starts, we're going to take you, Theramon and I, and deposit you in a little closet with one door to which is attached one giant lock and no windows. You'll remain there for the duration. And afterward, breathed Latimer fiercely, there'll be no one to let me out. I know as well as you do what the coming of the stars means. I know it far better than you. With all your minds gone, you are not likely to free me. Suffocation or slow starvation, is it? About what I might have expected from a group of scientists. But I don't give my word. It's a matter of principle, and I won't discuss it further. Anton seemed perturbed. His faded eyes were troubled. Really, Sharon, locking him, please. Sharon motioned him impatiently to silence. I don't think for a moment things will go that far. Latimer has just tried a clever little bluff. But I'm not a psychologist, just because I like the sound of the word. He grinned at the cultist. Come now. You don't really think I'm trying anything as crude as slow starvation, my dear Latimer. If I lock you in the closet, you are not going to see the darkness, and you are not going to see the stars. It does not take much of a knowledge of the fundamental creed of the cult to realize that for you to be hidden from the stars when they appear means the loss of your immortal soul. And now I believe you to be an honorable man. I'll accept your word of honor to make no further effort to disrupt proceedings if you'll offer it. A vein throbbed in Latimer's temple, and he seemed to shrink within himself as he said thickly, You have it. And then he added, with swift fury, But it is my consolation that you will all be damned for your deeds of today. He turned on his heel and stalked to the high, three-legged stool by the door. Sharon nodded to the columnist. Sorry. Or did I say that right the first time? Take a seat next to him, Theramon, just as a formality. Sorry, guys. Changing the page again. Hey, Theramon. But the newspaper man didn't move. He had gone pale to the lips. Look at that. The finger he pointed toward the sky shook, and his voice was dry and cracked. There was one simultaneous gasp as every eye followed the pointing finger, and for one breathless moment stared frozenly. Beta was chipped on one side. Just to pause, guys. Remember, Beta is at this point the only sun that can be seen in the sky in a solar system with, I believe it was 6 other suns, on a planet that never apparently sees nightfall or darkness. The tiny bit of encroaching blackness was perhaps the width of a fingernail, but to the starting watchers, it magnified itself into the crack of doom. Only for a moment they watched, and after that there was a shrieking confusion that was even shorter of duration, and which gave way to an orderly scurry of activity, each man at his prescribed job. At the crucial moment, there was no time for emotion. The men were merely scientists with work to do. Even Anton had melted away. Sharon said prosaicistically, I'm not going to try to pronounce it again. First, contact must have been made 15 minutes ago. A little early, but pretty good considering the uncertainties involved in the calculation. He looked about him and tiptoed to Theramon, who still remained staring out the window, and dragged him away gently. Anton is furious, he whispered, so stay away. He missed first contact on account of this fuss with Latimer, and if you get in his way, he'll have you thrown out the window. Theramon nodded slowly, shortly, and sat down. Sharon stared in surprise at him. The devil, man, he exclaimed. You are shaking. Eh? Theramon licked dry lips and then tried to smile. I don't feel very well, and that's a fact. The psychologist's eyes hardened. You're not losing your nerve? No, cried Theramon, in a flash of indignation. Give me a chance, will you? I haven't really believed this rigmarole. Not way down beneath, anyway. So just this minute, give me a chance to get used to the idea. You've been preparing yourself for 2 months or more. You're right at that, replied Sharon, thoughtfully. Listen. Have you got a family? Parents? Wife? Children? Theramon shook his head. You mean the hideout? I suppose. No, you don't have to worry about that. I have a sister. Wait, hold on. I'm going to figure out who's talking. I'm sorry. One moment, guys. I think it's still Theramon, the columnist from the newspaper, speaking. We'll just restart the sentence, I guess. Sometimes I lose my train of thought and I'm like, who am I supposed to be reading about now? Theramon shook his head. You mean the hideout? I suppose. No, you don't have to worry about that. I have a sister, but she's 2,000 miles away. I don't even know her exact address. Well then, what about yourself? You've got time to get there. And they're 1 short anyway, since I left. After all, you're not needed here. And you'd make a darn fine addition. Theramon looked at the other wearily. You think I'm scared stiff, don't you? Well, get this, mister. I'm a newspaper man, and I've been assigned to cover a story. I intend covering it. There's a faint smile on the psychologist's face. I see. Professional honor, is it? You might call it that. But man, I'd give my right arm for another bottle of that Sakura juice, even half the size of the one you hogged. If ever a fellow needed a drink, I do. He broke off. Sharon was nudging him violently. Do you hear that? Listen. Theramon followed the motion of the other's chin and stared at the cultist, who, oblivious to all about him, faced the window, a look of wild elation on his face, droning to himself, the while in sing-song fashion. What's he saying? Whispered the columnist. He's quoting Book of Revelations, 5th chapter, replied Sharon. Then urgently, keep quiet and listen. I tell you, the cultist's voice had risen in a sudden increase of fervor. And it came to pass that in those days of the sun, Beta held a lone vigil in the sky for ever longer periods as the revolutions passed, until such time as for full half a revolution it alone, shrunken and cold, shone down upon Lagash. And men did assemble in the public squares and in the highways, and there to debate and to marvel at the sight. For a strange depression had seized them. Their minds were troubled, and their speech confused. For the souls of men awaited the coming of the stars. And the city of Trigon, at high noon, Avendrit too came forth and said unto the men of Trigon, Lo, ye sinners, though ye scorn the ways of righteousness, yet will the time of reckoning come. Even now the cave approaches to swallow Lagash, yea, and all it contains. And even as he spoke, the lip of the cave of darkness passed the edge of Beta, so that to all Lagash was hidden from sight. Loud were the cries of men as it vanished and great the fear of soul that fell upon them. It came to pass that the darkness of the cave fell upon Lagash, and there was no light on all the surface of Lagash. Men were even as blinded, nor could one man see his neighbor, though he felt his breath upon his face. And in this blackness there appeared the stars in countless numbers, and to the strains of an affable music of a beauty so wondrous that the very leaves of the trees turned to tongues that cried out in wonder. And in that moment the souls of men departed from them, and their abandoned bodies became even as beasts, yea, even as brutes of the wild, so that through the blackened streets of the cities of Lagash they prowled with wild cries. From the stars there then reached down the heavenly flame, and where it touched, the cities of Lagash flamed to utter destruction, so that of man and of the works of man naught remained. Even then, there's a subtle change in Latimer's tone. His eyes had not shifted, but somehow he had become aware of the absorbed attention of the other two. Easily, without pausing for breath, the timbre of his voice shifted, and the syllables became more liquid. Thermon, caught by surprise, stared. The words seemed on the border of familiarity. There was an elusive shift in the accent, a tiny change in the vowel stress, nothing more. Yet Latimer had become thoroughly unintelligible. Sharon smiled slyly. He shifted to some old cycle tongue, probably their traditional second cycle. He shifted to some old cycle tongue, probably their traditional second cycle. That was the language in which the Book of Revelations had originally been written, you know. It doesn't matter. I've heard enough. Theramon shoved his chair back and brushed his hair back with hands that no longer shook. I feel much better now. You do? Sharon seemed mildly surprised. I'll say I do. I had a bad case of jitters just a while back. Listening to you and your gravitation and seeing that eclipse start almost finished me. But this... He jerked a contemptuous thumb at the yellow-branded cultist. This is the sort of thing my nurse used to tell me. I've been laughing at that sort of thing all my life. I'm not going to let it scare me now. He drew a deep breath and said, with a hectic gaiety, but if I expect to keep on the good side of myself, I'm going to turn my chair away from the window. Sharon said yes, but you'd better talk lower. Anton just lifted his head out of that box he's got it stuck into and gave you a look that should have killed you. Theramon made a mouth. I forgot about the old fellow. With elaborate care, he turned the chair from the window, cast one distasteful look over his shoulder, and said, It has occurred to me that there must be considerable immunity against this star madness. The psychologist did not answer immediately. Beta was past its zenith now. In the square of bloody sunlight that outlined the window upon the floor had lifted into Sharon's lap. He stared at its dusky color thoughtfully, then bent and squinted into the sun itself. The chip in its side had grown to a black encroachment that covered a third of Beta. He shuddered. And when he straightened once more, his florid cheeks did not contain quite as much color as they had previously. With a smile that was almost apologetic, he reversed his chair also. There are probably 2 million people in Cerro City that are all trying to join the cult at once in one gigantic revival. Then, ironically, the cult is in for an hour of unexampled prosperity. I trust they'll make the most of it. Now, what was it you said? Just this. How do the cultists manage to keep the Book of Revelations going from cycle to cycle? And how on Lagash did it get written in the first place? There must have been some sort of immunity, for if everyone had gone mad, who would be left to write the book? Sharon stared at his questioner ruefully. Well now, young man, there isn't any eyewitness answer to that, but you've got a few damn good notions as to what happened. You see, there are 3 kinds of people who might remain. As I turn the page again. Who might remain relatively unaffected. First, the very few who don't see the stars at all. The blind, those who drink themselves into a stupor at the beginning of the eclipse and remain so to the end. We leave them out because they aren't really witnesses. Then there are children below 6, to whom the world as a whole is too new and strange for them to be too frightened at stars and darkness. They would be just another item in an already surprising world. You see that, don't you? The other nodded doubtfully. I suppose so. Lastly, there are those whose minds are too coarsely grained to be entirely toppled. The very insensitive would be scarcely affected. Oh, and such people as some of our older, work-broken peasants. Well, the children would have fugitive memories, and that, combined with the confused, incoherent babblings of the half-mad morons, formed the basis for the Book of Revelations. Naturally, the book was based, in the first place, on the testimony of those least qualified to serve as historians, that is, children and morons, and was probably extensively edited and re-edited through the cycles. Do you suppose, Broken Theramon, that they carried the book through the cycles the way we're planning on handing on the secret of gravitation? Sharon shrugged. Perhaps. But their exact method is unimportant. They do it. Somehow. The point I was getting at was that the book can't help but be a mass of distortion, even if it is based on fact. For instance, do you remember the experiment with the holes in the roof that Pharaoh and Yamat tried? The one that didn't work. Yes? You know why it didn't? He stopped and rose in alarm, for Anton was approaching his face, a twisted mask of consternation. What's happened? Anton drew him aside, and Sharon could feel the fingers on his elbow twitching. Not so loud. Anton's voice was low and tortured. I've just gotten word from the hideout on the private line. Sharon broke in anxiously. They are in trouble. Not they. Anton stressed the pronoun significantly. They sealed themselves off just a while ago. They're going to stay buried till day after tomorrow. They're safe. But the city, Sharon, it's a shambles. You have no idea. He was having difficulty in speaking. Well? Snapped Sharon impatiently. What of it? It'll get worse. What are you shaking about then, suspiciously? How do you feel? Anton's eyes sparked angrily at the insinuation, and then faded to anxiety once more. You don't understand. The cultists are active. They're rousing the people to storm the observatory, promising them immediate entrance into grace, promising them salvation, promising them anything. What are we to do, Sharon? Ooh. Sharon's head bent, and he stared in long abstraction at his toes. He tapped his chin with one knuckle, then looked up and said crisply, Do? What is there to do? Nothing at all. Do the men know of this? No, of course not. Good. Keep it that way. How long till totality? Not quite an hour. There's nothing to do but gamble. I will take time to organize any really formidable mob. Sorry, I'm gonna repeat that. It'll take time to organize any really formidable mob. And it will take more time to get them out here. We're a good 5 miles from the city. He glared out the window, down the slopes, to where the farmed patches gave way to clumps of white houses in the suburbs, down to where the metropolis itself was a blur on the horizon, a mist in the waning blaze of Beta. He repeated without warning, It will take time. Keep on working and pray that totality comes first. Beta was cut in half. The line of division pushing a slight concavity into the still bright portion of the sun. It was like a gigantic eyelid, shutting slantwise over the light of a world. The faint clatter of the room in which he stood faded into oblivion, and he sensed only the thick silence of the fields outside. The very insects seemed frightened, mute, and things were dim. He jumped at the voice in his ear. The airman said, Is something wrong? No. Get back to the chair. Sorry, one second. We're in the way. They slipped back to their corner, but the psychologist did not speak for a time. He lifted a finger and loosened his collar. He twisted his neck back and forth, but found no relief. He looked up suddenly. Are you having any difficulty in breathing? The newspaper man opened his eyes wide and drew 2 or 3 long breaths. No. Why? I looked out the window too long, I suppose. The dimness got to me. Difficulty in breathing is one of the first symptoms of a claustrophobic attack. Darman drew another long breath. Well, it hasn't got me yet. Say, here's another of the fellows. Benet had interposed his bulk between the light and the pair in the corner, and Sharon squinted up at him anxiously. Hello, Benet. The astronomer shifted his weight to the other foot and smiled feebly. You won't mind if I sit down a while and join in on the talk? My cameras are set. There's nothing to do till totality. He paused and eyed the cultist, who 15 minutes earlier had drawn a small, skin-bound book from his sleeve and had been poring intently over it ever since. That rat hasn't been making trouble, has he? Sharon shook his head. His shoulders were thrown back, and he frowned his concentration as he forced himself to breathe regularly. He said, Have you had any trouble breathing, Benet? Benet sniffed there in his turn. It doesn't seem stuffy to me. A touch of claustrophobia, explained Sharon apologetically. Oh, it worked itself differently with me. I get the impression that my eyes are going back at me. Things seem to blur and, well, nothing is clear. And it's cold, too. Oh, it's cold, all right. That's no illusion, Theramon grimaced. My toes feel as if I've been shipping them cross country in a refrigerating car. What we need, put in Sharon, is to keep our minds busy with extraneous affairs. I was telling you a while ago, Theramon, why Pharaoh's experiments with the holes in the roof came to nothing. You were just beginning, replied Theramon. He encircled a knee with both arms and nuzzled his chin against it. Well, as I started to say, they were misled by taking the Book of Revelations literally. There probably wasn't any sense in attaching any physical significance to the stars. It might be, that in the presence of total darkness, the mind finds itself absolutely necessary to create light. This illusion of light might be all the stars there really are. In other words, interposed Theramon, you mean the stars are the results of the madness and not one of the causes? Then what good will Benet's photographs be? To prove that it is an illusion, maybe? Or to prove the opposite? For all I know, then again. But Benet had drawn his chair closer, and there was an expression of sudden enthusiasm on his face. Say, I'm glad you two got into the subject. His eyes narrowed, and he lifted one finger. I've been thinking about these stars, and I've got a really cute notion. Of course, it's strictly ocean foam. I'm not trying to advance it seriously, but I think it's interesting. Do you want to hear it? He seemed half reluctant, but Sharon leaned back and said, Go ahead, I'm listening. Well, then, supposing there were other suns in the universe. He broke off a little bashfully. I mean suns that are so far away that they're too dim to see. It sounds as if I've been reading some of that fantastic fiction, I suppose. Not necessarily still. Isn't that possibility eliminated by the fact that according to the law of gravitation, they would make themselves evident by their attractive forces? Not if they were far off enough, rejoined Benet. Really far off. Maybe as much as 4 light years or even more. We'd never be able to detect perturbations then, because they'd be too small. You say that there were a lot of suns that far off. A dozen or two, maybe. Theramon whistled melodiously. What an idea for a good Sunday supplement article. 2 dozen suns in a universe 8 light years across. Wow. That would shrink our universe into insignificance. The readers would eat it up. Only an idea, said Benet with a grin. But you see the point. During eclipse, these dozen suns would become visible because there'd be no real sunlight to drown them out, since they're all so far off. They'd appear small, like so many little marbles, of course. The cultists talk of millions of stars, but that's probably an exaggeration. There just isn't any place in the universe you could put 1 million suns, unless they touch one another. Sharon had listened with gradually increasing interest. You've hit something there, Benet. An exaggeration is just exactly what would happen. Our minds, as you probably know, can't grasp directly any number higher than 5. Above that, there's only the concept of many. A dozen would become 1 million, just like that. A damn good idea. And I've got another cute little notion, Benet said. Have you ever thought what a simple problem gravitation would be if only you had a sufficiently simple system. Supposing you had a universe in which there was a planet with only one sun. The planet would travel in a perfect ellipse, and the exact nature of the gravitational force would be so evident it could be accepted as an axiom. Astronomers on such a world would start off with gravity probably before they even invent the telescope. Naked eye observation would be enough. Sounds like something similar or familiar? But would such a system be dynamically stable? Questioned Sharon doubtfully. Sure. They call it the 1 and 1 case. It's been worked out mathematically, but it's the philosophical implications that interest me. It's nice to think about, admitted Sharon, as a pretty abstraction, like a perfect gas or absolute zero. Of course, continued Benet. There's the catch that life would be impossible on such a planet. It wouldn't get enough heat and light. And if it rotated, there'd be total darkness half of each day. You couldn't expect life, which is fundamentally dependent upon light, to develop under these conditions, or those conditions. Besides, Sharon's chair went over backward as he sprang to his feet in a rude interruption. Anton's brought out the lights. Benet said, Huh? Turned to stare, then grinned halfway around his head in open relief. There were half a dozen foot-long, inch-thick rods cradled in Anton's arms. He glared over them at the assembled staff members. Get back to work, all of you. Sharon, come here and help me. Sharon trotted to the older man's side, and one by one in utter silence, the two adjusted the rods in makeshift metal holders suspended from the walls. With the air of one carrying through the most sacred item of a religious ritual, Sharon scraped a large, clumsy match into spluttering life and passed it to Anton, who carried the flame to the upper end of one of the rods. It hesitated there a while, playing futilely about the tip, until a sudden crackling flare cast Anton's lined face into yellow highlights. He withdrew the match, and a spontaneous cheer rattled the window. Sorry, guys. The rod was topped by 6 inches of wavering flame. Now imagine this is supposed to be a very scientifically advanced culture. They have candles. They're using candles. I thought that was pretty funny. Methodically, the other rods were lighted until 6 independent fires turned the rear of the room yellow. The light was dim, dimmer even than the tenuous sunlight. The flames reeled crazily, giving birth to drunken, swaying shadows. The torches smoked devilishly and smelled like a bad day in the kitchen, but they emitted yellow light. There was something to yellow light. After 4 hours of somber, dimming beta, even Latimer had lifted his eyes from his book and stared in wonder. Sharon warmed his hands at the nearest, regardless of the soot that gathered upon him, then in a fine gray powder, and muttered ecstatically to himself, Beautiful. Beautiful. I never realized before what a wonderful color yellow is. But Theramon regarded the torches suspiciously. He wrinkled his nose at the rancid odor and said, What are those things? Wood, said Sharon shortly. Oh no, they're not. They aren't burning. The top inch is charred and the flame just keeps shooting up out of nothing. Oh, that's the beauty of it. This is a really efficient artificial light mechanism. We made a few hundred of them, but most went to the hideout, of course. You see, he turned and wiped his blackened hands upon his handkerchief. You take the pithy core of coarse water reeds, dry them thoroughly, and soak them in animal grease. Then you set fire to it, and the grease burns, little by little. These torches will burn for almost half an hour without stopping. Ingenious, isn't it? It was developed by one of our young men at Cyril University. After the momentary sensation, the dome had quieted. Latimer had carried his chair directly beneath a torch and continued reading, lips moving in the monotonous recital of the invocations to the stars. Benny had drifted away to his camera once more, and Theramon seized the opportunity to add to his notes on the article he was going to write for the Cerro City Chronicle the next day. A procedure he had been following for the last 2 hours in a perfectly methodical, perfectly conscientious, and, as he was well aware, perfectly meaningless fashion. But as the gleam of amusement in Sharon's eyes indicated, careful note-taking occupied his mind with something other than the fact that the sky was gradually turning a horrible, deep purple red, as if it were one gigantic, freshly peeled beet. And so it fulfilled its purpose. The air grew somehow denser. Dusk, like a palpable entity, entered the room, and the dancing circle of yellow light about the torches etched itself into ever sharper distinction against the gathering grayness beyond. There was the odor of smoke, and the presence of little chuckling sounds that the torches made as they burned. The soft pad of one of them encircling the table at which he worked on hesitant tiptoes, the occasional indrawn breath of someone trying to retain composure in a world that was retreating into the shadow. It was Theramon who first heard the extraneous noise. It was a vague, unorganized impression of sound that would have gone unnoticed, but for the dead silence that prevailed within the dome. The newsman sat upright and replaced his notebook. He held his breath and listened. Then, with considerable reluctance, threaded his way between the solar scope and one of Benny's cameras and stood before the window. The silence ripped to fragments at his startled shout, "Sharon!" Work stopped. And for right now, guys, that's where we're going to leave off. The page number is not important, but I'll just mark it, obviously. Okay. It's only like 3 more pages long, but I'm not going to be able to finish in time before the video gives out for lack of recording space. So guys, again, hope you enjoyed. Again, comments, questions, and constructive criticism down below, please and thank you. Do hope you enjoyed. I'm sorry for the herky-jerky camera movements. And I know I'm not the best narrator, but hope you enjoy the science fiction. I guess Isaac Asimov is a classic science fiction short story writer, so hey, figured something different, right? And Virus 2020, wash your hands. Later, guys. Take care. See you.